What's the strangest family tradition you've encountered when visiting someone else's home? About 5 or 6 years ago, I was dating a guy for about 7 months when we spent our first holiday season together. I flew back to his hometown with him and we stayed with his family for a little over a week. At first, everything seemed perfectly normal. His family was a little quirky but genuinely kind. Christmas was wonderful, warm, full of laughter, and exactly what you'd hope for. But things took a very strange turn on New Year's Eve. After dinner, everyone started talking about this special New Year's drink they made every year. I figured it was some kind of festive cocktail or a secret family recipe. I couldn't have been more wrong. It turned out to be a horrifying mixture of random ingredients that looked like it came straight from the forgotten corners of their pantry. Soon, they were pouring it into glasses and passing it around like it was some kind of sacred potion. They said it symbolized renewal and would bring good fortune for the year ahead. The smell hit me first, strong, sour, and absolutely stomach-turning. But everyone seemed so excited about this family ritual that I couldn't think of a polite way to refuse, so I braced myself and drank it like the rest of them. The moment it touched my tongue, I regretted every life choice that had led me there. It was thick, chunky, and somehow both bitter and sour at the same time. Before I could even process what I'd swallowed, people started running outside. Within seconds, they were all throwing up in the yard. Everyone, each person doubled over, cheering and clapping whenever someone else finished. I stood there frozen, completely stunned, watching what looked more like a bizarre cult ritual than a New Year's tradition. They turned to me, smiling, and explained that it was a cleansing act meant to wash away the old year and welcome the new one with pure energy. I forced a polite smile, but there was no way I was joining the cleansing celebration. The rest of the night was painfully awkward, and by the time the trip ended, I knew one thing for sure, that boyfriend was definitely not making it to another new year with me. Story 2. You know how some families have strange little traditions that make perfect sense to them but sound completely insane to everyone else? Well, mine takes the crown. My family poops big. Maybe it's genetic, maybe it's our diet, but everyone in my family produces giant logs. If you've ever laid a mega log, you know what I mean. Sometimes it just won't flush. It stretches across the bottom of the bowl, and the swirling water just gives it a gentle spin, like it's mocking you for trying. Growing up, this was so common that our family actually had something called a poop knife. It was an old rusty kitchen knife that hung on a nail in the laundry room, reserved for one very specific purpose. It was perfectly normal to hear someone call out, "Hey, can you get me the poop knife?" I never questioned it. I honestly thought every family had one. Just another standard bathroom tool, like a plunger or toilet brush. Fast forward to when I was 22. It had been a day or two since my last bathroom visit, and I was at my friend's house. This friend happened to be the local dealer, so his place was always packed with people. Apparently, you can't buy any without hanging around to sample it for an hour or two. I excused myself to use the bathroom, and sure enough, I dropped an absolute monster, the kind that makes any toilet question its life choices. When I looked down, the water was swirling around, but it wasn't going anywhere. Without thinking twice, I cracked the door open and called for my friend. He showed up, and I asked him for his poop knife. "My what?" he said, blinking in confusion. "Your poop knife," I repeated patiently. "I need to use it, please." He just stared at me, completely blank. What the heck is a poop knife? Obviously, I assumed he had one too. Maybe he just called it something fancier, like a cleaver, dung divider, or guano glaive. So I explained completely serious what I needed it for and why. At first, he started giggling, then laughing, and within seconds, the entire living room joined in. Apparently, the music had stopped right before I opened the door, so everyone had heard me asking for a poop knife. That's when it hit me, nobody else had one. It wasn't a universal household item. It was just my messed up family and their equally messed up bowels, FML. I told this whole story to my wife last night. She was both amused and horrified. She admitted she'd never even heard of a poop knife before. Then came the truly horrifying part. She told me she'd been using the old rusty knife hanging in our utility closet as a general-purpose knife around the house. Thankfully, she'd never used it for cooking, but she had used it to open Amazon boxes and cut tape. I nearly gagged. Needless to say, she's getting her own new proper utility knife now. Story 3. When I was around 10, my dad bought a white leather couch, a love seat, and a recliner and placed them in our tiny boxed-in living room. No one was allowed to sit on any of it. If you wanted to be in the living room, you had to sit on the floor. It was heavily implied that the living room was for show, not for enjoyment. Every day, he would clean the leather furniture with this super strong-smelling oil to keep it looking new. He also bought a massive, expensive wooden dining table with leather chairs. Nobody was allowed to use it. You were explicitly forbidden from sitting at it, using it, or bringing food anywhere near it. Even setting a drink on that table could earn you days of being grounded. Eating at his house came with strict rules. You had to stay in the kitchen, use as few dishes and materials as possible, and eat over the sink. Afterwards, you were required to sweep and mop the floor, wash the dishes immediately, hand dry them, put them away, and clean the counters, all in that exact order. If even a single crumb was left behind, he would hunt for it. That could mean a multiple hour-long lecture. Your cooking rights would be revoked, meaning you could no longer prepare food in the house or eat inside at all. You'd have to scavenge whatever you could find in the garage fridge until you earned back your cooking privileges. Story 4. I went to a holiday meal with extended family who are eco-friendly vegan composters, like all their drinkware is rinsed out in jelly jars and such. Everyone brought dishes to the meal and we were given our dishes back at the end. I was early in pregnancy and craving apples hardcore, so I was super excited when they returned the big bowl of sweet apple salad I had made, Chores, thinking it was going to be an amazing midnight snack. Imagine my surprise when I got home and dug in to find tomatoes, onions, cucumber, and dill mixed in with it. At first I thought, okay, maybe someone mixed up the serving spoons and I could just scoop that part out. Pregnancy food sensitivities weren't helping, but I really wanted those apples, so I kept trying. Nope, Israeli salad flavors persisted. My husband asked what was wrong, and I told him someone had mixed up the spoons, and now my carousel had some Israeli salad mixed in. He said, oh, they don't believe in food waste, they save all the leftovers. I assumed he meant they composted food scraps or always ate their leftovers. Nope, what it actually meant was that they scraped all the food off everyone's plates back into the serving dishes at the end of the meal. I realized I had been eating the leftovers of 12 in-laws and their friends, and I nearly got sick. To this day, I can't eat my favorite Chores without feeling grossed out remembering what it tasted like with dill added in. Story 5. When I was dating a Czech girl in Ireland, we flew back to her small village, about 30 kilometers outside Prague, to meet her parents. We were sitting outside on the patio in the warm sun, enjoying lunch, when her mother proudly emerged from the kitchen, carrying 2 steaming plates, one for her husband, the true patriarch of the family, and one for me, the guest of honor. My girlfriend translated everything for me as her mother placed the dish in front of me with great care. It looked like a thin, watery soup with a few slices of onion floating in it, but right in the middle sat something I couldn't believe. My stomach twisted, but I managed a polite smile. My mama wants to give you the brains of the rabbit because you are our special guest today, my girlfriend translated warmly. I forced a grin and whispered, please thank her for me. But my girlfriend kicked me under the table and hissed, eat it. The parents watched me with hopeful eyes, waiting for my reaction. Taking a deep breath, I swallowed it whole with a gulp of Coke like one might do with a Brussels sprout. They immediately burst into applause, clapping joyfully. You are in the family now, they said proudly. It was something I never imagined hearing outside a George A. Romero film. That very moment, my attraction to that beautiful Czech girl faded. The thought of endless family dinners filled with more brain feasts was enough to cool things off for good. Story 6. Growing up, my best friend had a father who was like a less funny Ned Flanders, but creepier. Their entire house was filled with things you weren't allowed to touch. A TV only for football, a VCR with no movies, and a floor-to-ceiling bookcase full of completely off-limits books. One night, I was spending the night, and my friend grabbed the new Sears Wish book that had just arrived. Any kid in the 70s and 80s remembers how magical those catalogs were. We were flipping through the latest Atari 2600 games when his dad came into the room, told me to gather my stuff, and drove me home immediately. Not a word more. Turns out my friend was being punished for taking a catalog without permission. We were 12. It reminded me of when Flanders got a satellite dish with 260 channels just to block them all. The house felt like a bizarre museum of rules. Years later, my friend ended up struggling with pills, while his perfect sister married a professional bodybuilder who happened to be black and nearly ended the lives of his parents. Story 7. My family had a tradition we called the napkin game, usually played whenever we had guests over. We were a big family, 9 kids in total, and we always ate dinner together around a massive table. Only adults or guests who already knew the game were allowed to start it. Children weren't trusted with that kind of power. The game typically began near the end of dinner, when most people had finished eating and conversation was winding down. Someone who was allowed to start would ball up their napkin and toss it across the table, aiming to land it in someone else's cup. From there, chaos erupted. Everyone would roll up their napkins and start throwing, each person trying to land one in a cup across the table before anyone else. The rules were simple but sacred. The game ended the moment the first napkin landed inside a cup, and the person who made that shot was declared the winner. Multiple rounds were allowed, and often happened, though we eventually set a limit after one 14-year-old guest wouldn't stop starting new games. No one could just drop a napkin into a nearby cup. It had to be thrown from a reasonable distance. We allowed some leniency for smaller kids. No blocking or swatting napkins out of the air. Everyone had to play fair. Fresh napkins couldn't be used as ammo. Only the ones already on the table were fair game, so players often had to leap from their chairs to grab napkins off the floor. If you didn't want your drink to get ruined, you could cover your cup with your hand, but doing so meant you were opting out of the game entirely and couldn't throw napkins yourself. We also had a ridiculously ugly cereal bowl-sized mug that we dubbed the napkin trophy. We even talked about putting up a shelf to display it, complete with a nameplate for the reigning champion, but we never got around to it before someone accidentally dropped it and broke it. Despite the occasional spilled drink or a napkin to the face, the game was always a huge hit with guests. It was this perfect mix of laughter, chaos, and friendly competition. I have so many fond memories of arguing with siblings and guests who accidentally blocked a winning shot, or teasing each other about keeping the victorious napkin for display. Story 8. I went to dinner at an older couple's home in the late 90s. They had invited my whole family. Classical music played softly, candles flickered, and little treats were arranged on silver platters. Their home was adorned with a few paintings by famous artists. The night felt like a fairy tale. Soft light, plush furniture, not a television in sight. The man even had my chicken plant worker dad wrapped up in a conversation about Monet painting his wife on her deathbed. I thought this was what life should look like. Perfect. After we said our goodbyes, it was past 11. Having eaten our fill of cheesecake puffs and sipped amaretto, we got into our rusty Buick LeSabre and pulled out of the driveway. The car slipped on the ice and got stuck in debris at the side of the road. My sister and I walked back up the driveway to ask if we could use their phone to call our uncle with a four-wheel drive to come get us. The couple was watching a movie, I think Happy Gilmore, in sweatpants. Suddenly, I noticed a huge tube television on a rolling cart, sitting right beneath the Impressionist paintings. The man answered the door with a Budweiser in hand. All the candles were gone, and the bright lights were on. I called my uncle and just stood there. They told us we could wait on the porch until he arrived, then promptly ushered us out, turning off all the lights, even the porch lights. My sister and I slid down the driveway, silently agreeing we would never tell our parents what we had just seen. Story 9. The house wasn't very big. On the left was the salon, called the Royal Room. On the right was a sitting area with a kitchen and a tiny table. It was almost all one open space. Off the kitchen, a stairway led up to the bedrooms, one at the front and two small ones at the back. One back room was divided almost to the ceiling, creating boys' and girls' sides, with a ceiling light running through the wall so it didn't reach the top. At the end of the hall was a crude WC add-on with just a toilet. Each bedroom had its own sink. It felt like estate housing. Out the back door in the kitchen was an old fireplace and a tiny garden. Nearby sat an ancient washing machine and a clothesline. The machine heated water to wash clothes. Everything seemed so backward compared to Toronto, where we lived. A coal chute on the side of the house fed a basement coal furnace that needed constant tending. Electricity was controlled by a coin-operated mechanism in the kitchen. There was no phone. Everyone went to the corner shop to make calls or place orders. The milkman and a fishmonger with a wagon of fish came regularly. To 8-year-old me, it was all fascinating. Story 10. As a teen, my family and I went to the house of one of my dad's work friends, a widow with 2 daughters, for dinner. I immediately noticed that she treated one daughter far better than the other, which felt really strange. When we got home, I told my parents what I had seen. My mom went quiet and said she couldn't explain it because I was too young to understand and might get upset. I told her I was old enough to handle it, and if I got upset, that was my business. She then explained that the elder daughter was the woman's biological child, while the younger daughter was actually the child of the woman's best friend. Her husband had an affair with that friend, and the younger daughter was the result. Both the husband and the friend later died in a car accident, and the widow took in the child. The younger daughter became a permanent reminder of the infidelity and of the tragedy that had taken both her mother's friend and the friend's husband. Being around 14 or 15 at the time, I was absolutely shocked. It felt like a plot straight out of a soap opera which I was watching at the time, but it also made me feel deeply sad for the younger daughter, who had to live with the consequences of events she had no part in causing. Story 11. It's funny how one small comment can change the rhythm of your life. Now that I have kids, we sit and eat dinner together every night. No phones allowed, just food, laughter, and conversation. It's such a calm part of the day, and I hope it gives my kids a sense of peace and togetherness they'll carry with them when they leave home. But this habit didn't appear out of nowhere. It started because of something I once heard from a friend's mom. She had come to visit her daughter, and a group of us new moms were there, chatting about the chaos of dinner time. You know the kind, feeding toddlers their tiny meals, cleaning up, putting them to bed, and then grabbing something quick to eat with our spouses in front of the TV before calling it a night. That's when she told us about her own family. She said she had raised 5 daughters, and every single night from the very beginning, they sat and ate dinner together as a family. no exceptions, every night, until each daughter eventually left home. The room fell quiet as we all pictured it. 5 daughters, their parents, a warm meal, laughter, maybe a few small arguments, but most of all, peace. The thought of that simple, steady family ritual stayed with me. Later that day, I told my husband about it and how much I loved the idea. At that time, we were preparing for a big move, so life was messy and unpredictable. But once we settled into our new home, on the very first night, we all sat down for dinner together. Even our baby. From that night on, it became our thing. 7 years later, we still do it. Every night, without fail. One simple comment planted the image, the feeling, and the habit that became the heart of our family. Story 12. A few doors down from our house lived a family surrounded by a wild rumor that they might be human eaters. I was always the friendly kid who played with everyone, so when their daughter's family invited me over, I went. They seemed genuinely thrilled to have me there, treating me like some kind of special guest. Then the smell of food hit me at such an odd hour, not quite breakfast, not brunch, not lunch, maybe an early dinner. The mom was cooking these massive Bratwurst sausages, thick and heavy, unlike anything I'd ever seen in a store. They looked homemade, which felt strange for a suburban black family without even a small farm. Suddenly, the neighborhood rumors started creeping into my 10-year-old mind, and I had to fight uneasy thoughts. My manners forced me to take a bite, but the texture felt foreign. I had just seen a documentary about indigenous people eating bull tater tots, and that image made me gag a little. I took a deep breath and tried to eat anyway. There were no sides, just that huge sausage sitting alone on the plate. I nervously asked if there might be eggs or rice to go with it, but there wasn't. Eating a plain sausage like that felt so bizarre, and honestly, it didn't even taste good. Later, I learned they were a military family, and Bratwurst was a tradition they had picked up overseas. What had once felt like a creepy neighborhood legend turned out to be nothing more than an old family custom. Story 13. I have 4 boys aged 27 to 15, all over 6'1", and a 6'5" husband. We married and had kids young, and man, we struggled financially for quite a while. Our grocery bills with that many hungry, active, growing, and large dudes to feed were staggering. So aside from coming up with creative poverty meals, one of which is still the dish all of them ask for on their birthdays, I also served everyone their portions to keep control and make sure everyone got enough. They always did before anyone criticized. We had a family dinner on Sunday. The food was on the table, and everyone was chatting and sitting there. I was cleaning up a spill, so I was definitely the last to the table. I did my usual plating everyone's food and realized I still do this out of habit. I never enforce it, it just happens. No one serves themselves, I just pick up the serving utensils and do it. I mentioned that it felt a bit silly and infantilizing since this hasn't been necessary in over 15 years. Everyone laughed because no one else had noticed or thought about it either, but they said it actually made them feel loved and wanted to keep it the same if I didn't mind. I agreed, though it still felt a little low-key and made me feel slightly guilty as a mom. But now, thinking about it, I feel way better. Lol, that poor kid. Story 14. Back in middle and high school, in the late 90s and early 2000s, I used to hang out at a friend's house and noticed a couple of really strange family habits. First, we were in her kitchen looking for snacks, and I asked if I could have something. Nope, it was her dad's. This blew my teenage mind because in my house, food belonged to everyone. First come, first served. She didn't really snack either, like ever. I would always end up starving when I hung out there. Eventually, I learned to bring my own stash. Don't get me wrong, they had food, but it was mostly reserved for actual meals. It wasn't about money. They just didn't snack or go for seconds. Second, sometime in high school, she and her mom got into an argument over something. You know you've been friends with someone a long time when their mom is comfortable yelling at them in front of you. At one point, her mom mentioned being mad at herself for something or other. Back then, this concept was completely foreign to me. In all my experience, if someone was angry, it had to be someone else's fault. Someone yelled at you? Clearly, it was your fault. Ergo, if I was upset with someone, it had to be their fault. Seeing her mom acknowledge her own anger was oddly enlightening, and it's a lesson that has stuck with me ever since. Story 15. My first girlfriend, who years later became my first wife, but that's a long story, had never used a knife to cut food before. Her then lesbian partner, who was our witness, could attest to this. She'd only ever used a butter knife for bread or Miracle Whip, and sometimes the side of a fork for soft things. But anything like pork, steak, or chicken breasts, her mom always cut it up before it was cooked. And the other guys, plus one girl she dated before me, never took her anywhere fancier than McDonald's. So we went on a date to Olive Garden, and she ordered stuffed chicken parm. Not really thinking it would need to be cut, she assumed it would be like her mom's chicken parm and already be sliced. She looked at her plate and then at me, and I asked what was wrong. She said she didn't really know how to cut it, so I showed her. It took a few dates for her to get it right, and she ended up teaching her younger sister. This woman was in college, and I was still in high school. It blew my mind. She was 2 years older than I was. We are still really good friends. We dated in the early to mid-90s, married in the late mid-90s for 30 days, then annulled. Story 16. You know that moment when you realize you might be the most ridiculous parent on the planet? Yeah, that's me. Now that I'm typing this, I'm cringing, because even though I'm a 42-year-old mother to 2 boys, I am, in all honesty, a 12-year-old boy at heart. But that does not excuse the disgusting and abhorrent habit I have of asking my very annoyed children, "Hey, did you get my message?" and then proceeding to push out a very loud, reverberating fart and laughing freaking hysterically about it because I'm a total heathen. Sometimes I silently fart and ask if they smell popcorn. They have learned to ignore my myriad of stupid creative ways to rid myself of a fart. Reading this comment section, I realize I'm guilty of having done this in front of their friends. Now, I'm mortified. Do I reach out to these now older kids and apologize for my heinous bottom? Do I apologize to my very traumatized kids and just grow up? What is wrong with me that I find farting so amusing? I'm sorry you had to endure the trauma of someone else's mom's head farts. I can imagine that was quite shocking to witness. I can't believe a comment about head farts has me questioning my existence and triggering some serious soul searching. Story 17. I am not a snacker, but my husband is, and our children are grazers, so our house is constantly full of snacks. When our kids were younger, my husband had his snacks that no one was allowed to touch. Fine by me, the non-snacker, but I'm glad he now just takes them upstairs before our kids are old enough to have friends over and get confused by the system. Still, my kids occasionally erupt with, "That's my insert whatever food they requested from the store. Why is my sister eating card a bit you?" As if I won't replace it when it runs out. It's also interesting that you mentioned the mad at myself concept. My spouse struggles with believing that everything has to be someone's fault. So, I work hard with our children to teach them not to use blame language, to understand that we feel what we feel but are responsible for our actions, and that we cannot let others dictate our emotions or behavior. Honestly, I don't think I would be so intentional or aware about teaching this if it weren't for my husband's tendency to always assign blame. It's interesting to hear from someone else that this isn't an innate concept, and it makes me reflect on how much parenting shapes understanding beyond instinct. Story 18. Christmas at my uncle's house is always an adventure. He gives real gifts to everyone, but then he throws in something completely random just to keep things interesting. This year, I opened my gift bag and found a piece of toast. He had toasted a slice of bread, slipped it into a Ziploc, and tucked it in alongside some much-appreciated gift cards. Watching a new partner try to figure out what's happening is priceless. Over the years, I've received zip ties, a turkey baster, and I think one partially used 9-volt battery, or maybe it was a package of 2 with 1 left. I can't remember. All of them ended up useful at some point, especially the 9-volt, because my smoke detector needed a new battery almost immediately. One morning, my kid snuck the piece of toast out of the gift bag when he was hungry, before the sun was even up. He declared it actually really good, and there was no butter or anything on it. It's a quirky, funny, and completely endearing tradition, and I can't wait for my kid to be old enough to get one himself, though he's still too young to fully understand the joke. Story 19. When I was about 13, a good friend of mine invited me to spend the night at his house one Friday. The plan was simple: get jacked up on sugar and play video games, which sounded awesome. My parents agreed, so I biked over and arrived a few hours before dinner. At first, everything seemed normal. The house, the parents, the siblings, no red flags at all. Then it was time to eat. That's when things got weird. His dad came out singing a song about washing our hands and mouths. My friend explained that we had to wash our mouths so the food wouldn't get mad and would taste better. The ritual involved that nasty yellow Listerine. They filled the bathroom sink with it, and my friend dipped his hands in, scooped some into a cup, rinsed and gargled, then spat it back into the sink. His 2 little brothers did the same, and then their mother, who had been watching the entire time, said, "Good job, men, I'm so proud of you," and directed their sister to the sink before she herself partook. It was freaking disgusting, and I couldn't believe this was considered normal. Story 20. You won't believe how awesome my childhood summers were. My grandma ran a private at-home daycare, fully licensed and legal, but most of her kids were actually friends of very close friends and family. So basically, it was a little family community, which makes the rest make sense. My uncle Eli was the absolute legend of that house. His room was the coolest place ever. Bright green carpet, graffiti-covered walls, and a waterbed. We all used to sneak in just to hang out. One summer it became a routine. He'd shut off the lights, blast EDM music, and swing glow sticks around while we danced and laughed. It was like having our own private mini festival. Those nights are some of my most vivid childhood memories. It might sound strange to outsiders, but these were basically family members, kids my grandma had raised since they were babies. There were about 10 of us, and we got to experience this wild, free-spirited EDC vibe right in Eli's room. Even now, years later, those 10 kids are still friends. We always bring up those nights and laugh, remembering just how magical it all was. Story 21. It probably started as an easy routine when your friend was a child. Brushing teeth with their child to help them get into good habits is recommended, and doing it at the larger sink made sense, either because there was more room or because a younger sibling was in the bathroom taking a bath. Then, it just became a habit. Years later, when the tween got braces, they kept it up to make sure the orthodontic work was being properly cared for. Now, it's just a small shared routine they still do together, almost unconsciously. Sometimes it might even have started because of practical reasons, like the bathroom plumbing, making the sink drain better for toothpaste. I've also known a few people who keep a toothbrush in the kitchen so they can brush after breakfast before leaving in the morning. In this case, the children's toothbrushes are duplicated in the half bath downstairs for convenience, but if there wasn't a bath right off the kitchen, I could see the kitchen sink becoming the secondary location. And honestly, if we want to talk about picking up scents, the kitchen might even feel safer than the bathroom. Story 22. My dad, stepdad, but truly the best dad and man I've ever known, can trim a rose or pop a pine cone off a branch with a bullwhip. I only discovered this when an old friend of his went to Mexico and brought him back a beautiful about 12-foot bullwhip. I knew he had spent time living in Mexico as a working cowboy on a huge ranch. Dad is a white guy from a small town in Texas, but he is also a cowboy, and he picked up some incredible skills down there. He was even hit by lightning on horseback while trying to help control a massive herd during a storm. Both he and the horse were shaken but mostly fine. The lightning messed up his hat, but they were okay. He's been hit by lightning 2 other times, both after he and my mom met. I was never a problem kid, but my younger brother seemed to behave a bit better after Dad popped a few pine cones off and neatly trimmed a rose, even carefully trimming some leaves while they were being held by his friend. Story 23. You think bathroom doors are just doors. Think again. Growing up, some people had this absolute obsession with closing their bathroom doors even when the bathroom was empty, and it drove me nuts. The unwritten rules were impossible to follow. A. Knock first, yeah right. What if someone is actually in there? Or B. Just walk in. Yeah right. What if someone is in there? Either way, chaos. I remember staying over at friends' houses and simply avoiding the bathroom for hours because I didn't want to risk it. If I absolutely had to go, I would stand outside, waiting for the door to open, hoping to catch a clear signal that no one was inside. The worst part? Most of these bathrooms had doors that didn't even lock. I'd try to lock them and it wouldn't work, leaving me with no choice but to walk out. And if it did lock and I dared to lock it, someone would just try to open it anyway. No knock, no warning. What the heck kind of logic is that? And then, the kicker. They'd get upset if I left the door open afterward like a freaking normal person. It was like living in a house where the bathroom rules were written by some invisible sadistic referee. Story 24. When I think of my childhood, one of my favorite family traditions comes to mind. My mother's doghouse. She made it out of red construction paper and carefully assigned each of us a dog that she felt represented our personalities, including herself. She printed the images, glued them to cardstock with our names, and hung them up in the kitchen on a small nail. If someone did something bad, their dog picture went straight into the doghouse. It was all in good fun though, and quickly became a game we loved. For instance, my brother once ate all the cream from the middle of the Vienna finger cookies and tossed the cookie part into the doghouse he went. One time, my mom picked me up late, so I cheekily moved her dog photo into the doghouse. Our friends thought this was absolutely hilarious and even asked their parents to make a doghouse for them or give them a dog photo to join in the fun. Looking back, it wasn't just a silly game. It was a clever way to teach accountability while keeping laughter at the center of family life. Story 25. Ever wonder what peak 70s glamour looked like? For kitchens, it was avocado formica, while swirly dark woods with a rococo or Spanish flair, paired with velvet or faux suede, created a whole different kind of chic. When I bought my first house, it belonged to an elderly lady who had clearly been ahead of the trend. The kitchen had avocado linoleum, patterned with the same swirling rococo/Spanish-inspired design. The guest bathroom went even further, featuring red faux suede textured wallpaper with raised swirls, each tipped with fake gold leaf. Removing it was an absolute headache, but necessary so I could install 80s chintz, which I thought was a massive improvement at the time because it was all the rage. The stubborn linoleum refused to budge as well. Clearly, they knew how to make adhesives back then. During the renovation, I couldn't help but jokingly call it 1970s bordello chic. Story 26. Years ago, I spent Thanksgiving at a friend's house. When the table was set and we all sat down, the Westminster Dog Show was playing on a small 13-inch TV/VCR combo perched on a buffet table at the head of the room. When I tried to make some casual table conversation, I was shooshed and told, like I was an idiot, "TV is on," as they pointed to the screen. Not a single word was spoken during the entire meal. All 10 to 12 people around the table quietly watched the dog show while serving themselves in silence. Later, my friend explained that it wasn't about worshipping television, as I had jokingly accused them of. Years earlier, fights at the table had gotten so bad that the family established a rule: no talking while the TV was on. The rule worked perfectly. Whenever the TV was on in the room, nobody spoke, eliminating the snippy side comments that previously turned into verbal brawls. Other than that, they seemed like a genuinely nice family. Story 27. I grew up in a poor immigrant community in New York City and moved to a well-off suburb in high school. I became friends with a guy down the road and went over to his house. We went upstairs to grab some snacks, and he opened the dishwasher, which was full of all his junk food. Bags of chips, Gushers, candy bars, popcorn, and every treat you could imagine. I had grown up in an apartment and had never seen a dishwasher until about a month earlier in our new home. I was completely blown away that this is where they stored their snacks. On top of that, I was shocked at how much there was, as both racks were full. His mother allowed this and hand-washed everything herself. He ended up living at home until a girl got pregnant, and they had 3 kids together who were essentially anchor babies. He finally got a job for the first time in his life, but his parents continued to pay the rent on the house, even though he was making minimum wage. The moral? Don't spoil your kids. Story 28. Oof. My mother-in-law's idea of a fun family vacation was stuffing everyone into a tiny cabin like sardines, usually with twice as many people as beds, and then grocery shopping as if she were feeding a quarter of the actual number of guests. One example I always use to illustrate this madness is buying 13 pieces of chicken to grill for dinner, when 26 people were staying at the cabin, 25 adults and 1 child, and the cabin was only supposed to sleep 17. And it wasn't like there were multiple entrees either. After taking a few years off from those trips, when we rejoined, we started paying extra to ensure we had proper rooms, and grocery shopping was handled by other people. It has improved greatly. I am the hostess who always makes too much food and sends people home with leftovers, so I can't handle creating artificial food scarcity at an event. I've heard people say they prefer it if all the food is gone, but I worry someone might miss enjoying the event because they're hungry. Story 29. Hardcore, observant religious people will sometimes risk their lives for their customs. Jews, however, do not. There is a law called pikuach nefesh, which essentially means that any commandment must be set aside if following it would endanger a life. For example, Jewish emergency services and medical staff will work on Saturdays when necessary. In Jewish-run hospitals, elevators are typically set to stop at every floor on Saturdays automatically. However, if a patient or doctor needs to move quickly, they can push the button and proceed directly to their floor. Riding in an elevator does not break the Sabbath, but pushing the button for your floor does. In fact, there is a rule that if the Sabbath must be broken to save a life, such as using a phone to call an ambulance or driving someone to the hospital, and more than one Jew can help, the more strictly observant person should be the one to act. Story 30. When I was growing up in poverty in Appalachia, I got used to households running like miniature workforces. Most adults were busy with jobs or farm work, and children were expected to pitch in. So, when I started visiting friends' houses, I noticed something that at first seemed normal, but quickly became a bit strange from a visitor's perspective: the way children were treated as either guests or unofficial helpers. Some families treated visiting kids like royalty. You were a guest offered snacks, a cozy seat, maybe even a little freedom from chores. But other families, well, they expected you to jump right into the household rhythm. You weren't just a visitor, you were an extra pair of hands, a temporary household worker. At first, I didn't think much of it because I was used to pitching in myself, but for friends from other neighborhoods, it was bizarre. Imagine showing up just to hang out, only to be handed a broom or sent to feed the chickens. I remember one weekend vividly. I had tagged along to a friend's house, expecting a casual Saturday of board games and hanging out. Instead, I woke up at 5 in the morning, still half asleep, to help slosh out to the barn with the 4-H kids. There was a group of us, but only the kids who were raised on farms actually knew how to handle the animals. The newcomers, who didn't have the same chores at home, looked like they had been woken from a deep coma. But for the farm kids, including me, it was just another part of life. The smell of hay, the clucking of chickens, the lowing of cows, all part of a Saturday morning ritual that outsiders might find weird, even a little brutal. It got even stranger when I had to babysit a brood of younger siblings or help grandma who had dementia with her morning routine. The family had a system, and visitors were expected to fall in line. I remember one cousin explaining to me that it was almost a rite of passage for visiting children. You either helped or you didn't eat breakfast. They weren't trying to be cruel, it was just how that household operated. Contrast that with my own household now. Every friend who comes over is treated as a guest. No chores expected. My children are still responsible for cleaning up after themselves, but bigger tasks wait until their friend goes home. It's part of a deliberate effort to make visiting feel special, safe, and enjoyable, something I learned from seeing how differently other families treated guests. The strangest part, looking back, isn't that some families had work-based traditions or expectations for visitors. It's how normalized it was. For the kids in those homes, chores and helping out were part of everyday life, and extending that expectation to visitors was just an unspoken tradition. It's a tradition you notice immediately when you walk through the door, yet you can't quite put your finger on why it feels so unusual. Even today, I sometimes laugh when I tell friends about those early mornings in the barn or helping with grandma's chores. From the outside, it probably seems like a harsh or overly structured family tradition. But in reality, it was about community, responsibility, and making sure everyone resident or visitor understood the rhythm of the household. That blend of practicality, expectation, and unspoken rules is exactly why it stands out as one of the strangest family traditions I've ever experienced when visiting someone else's home. Visiting that friend's home was a reminder that family traditions are as varied as families themselves. Some are cozy, some are bizarre, and some are downright shocking to an outsider. But all of them reflect the values and culture of the household. For me, being thrown into chores as a visitor wasn't just a lesson in work ethic, it was a front-row seat to the unique, sometimes strange, but always fascinating ways families operate behind closed doors. Story 31. One of the strangest family traditions I've ever encountered happened with my ex and her family, and it was both hilarious and slightly bewildering at the same time. It all revolved around attending concerts, but not in the way you might expect. For them, going to a concert wasn't just about enjoying the music or seeing the band live, it was an all-out ritual, complete with strict dress codes. In their family, every single person had to wear a shirt of the band they were seeing, no exceptions. And yes, this included me, the poor outsider who had somehow stumbled into this bizarre tradition. I remember one specific incident, vividly. My then-wife and I were invited to a Fall Out Boy show. I was genuinely excited about the idea of going, but I didn't think too much about what to wear. That was a mistake. As soon as I mentioned not having a band shirt, she gave me a look of absolute horror. Not a judgmental look, like she was disappointed in me for forgetting something trivial, but a look that communicated clearly. How dare you show up to this sacred ritual unprepared? She then instructed me to go to the band's official merch website and pick out a shirt so that I would have something to wear. I'll admit, I hesitated. I wasn't opposed to supporting the band, but buying a shirt solely for conformity felt strange to me. I said I didn't really want to buy one, and the reaction was immediate and dramatic. She looked genuinely disgusted, as if I had committed a moral transgression. Her mother and sister, who were both present during this exchange, also expressed subtle, almost imperceptible annoyance, though I could tell they were silently judging me as well. They could not comprehend why I would consider going to a concert without adhering to this unspoken family dress code. To them, wearing your own clothes was not an option. It was practically sacrilegious. What made this even stranger was the reasoning behind it. Apparently, the moment they purchased tickets for any show, the very next thing they did, without exception, was buy band shirts for the whole family. It didn't matter if it was a casual show, a festival, or a tiny local venue. The ritual was mandatory. They all wore their matching shirts proudly, and if you were new to the family or dating someone within it, you had no choice but to comply. The idea, as I slowly pieced together, was that the shirts represented solidarity and loyalty to the band. But it wasn't about being a front-row superfan or demonstrating knowledge of obscure lyrics. And here's the kicker, they weren't even the kind of fans you'd expect. These weren't people who knew every song by heart or crowd-surfed their way to the front row. In fact, when it came time to actually attend the concerts, they always bought the cheapest tickets way in the back. They would stand quietly for the entire show, maybe quietly singing along if they knew the words, but mostly just observing. There was no moshing, no shouting, no extreme fangirling or fanboying. It was a calm, almost ceremonious experience. They took the ritual of wearing matching shirts seriously, but the experience of watching the band live was subdued and almost anticlimactic compared to the preparation. I remember thinking how bizarre it was that the outward appearance, the shirts, the synchronized attire, the conformity, was more important than the music itself. It was almost like a family uniform, a visible sign that everyone was participating and belonged. Even if you were an outsider like me, I spent the entire concert hyper-aware of my clothing choices, constantly adjusting my shirt and trying to look like I belonged, while the family around me treated it like the most natural thing in the world. Looking back, I can't help but laugh. It was strange, yes, but it was also oddly endearing. This tradition showed me a glimpse into how families create rituals that seem completely illogical from the outside, but make perfect sense internally. For my ex and her family, matching band shirts weren't just clothing. They were a way to bond, demonstrate loyalty, and follow a tradition that was considered non-negotiable. Even now, years later, whenever I go to a concert, I can't help but think about that night. The tradition was odd, but it was also a reminder that family rituals don't have to make sense to outsiders to be meaningful to those who practice them. Sometimes, the strangest traditions are the ones that stick with you the most, even long after the concert ends. Story 32. When I was about 11 or 12, I stayed over at a friend's house for the first time. I had known this friend for a while and thought I understood their family dynamic, or at least I thought I did, but nothing could have prepared me for what awaited me that weekend. What I experienced still sticks in my mind as one of the strangest family traditions I've ever encountered. It's the kind of thing that makes you question how people function in their own homes and what counts as normal elsewhere. The first hint that something unusual was afoot came the next morning. I had slept in later than usual, as kids do on weekends. I rolled out of bed groggily, my pajamas wrinkled, hair sticking up in every direction, and wandered downstairs expecting the usual casual atmosphere that most families have for breakfast. I assumed my friend's parents would offer me coffee, cereal, maybe some toast if I asked nicely. I assumed wrong. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I was stopped dead in my tracks. There, in the dining room, sat my friend and their entire immediate family, all neatly dressed and perfectly groomed, sitting at a fully laid breakfast table that could have been straight out of a magazine. Pancakes stacked in perfectly even towers, eggs cooked to perfection, strips of bacon arranged neatly beside them, glasses of freshly squeezed orange juice glinting in the morning light, and every utensil precisely aligned. The table was enormous, and the family members were all sitting with impeccable posture, as if they were models for some bizarre breakfast commercial. I froze in the doorway, unsure whether I should enter or run. My friend's parents gave me what I can only describe as a dirty look, one that conveyed equal parts annoyance and judgment. My friend, who had obviously been trained in this ritual, didn't offer a greeting, a smile, or even a wave. Instead, they continued eating, ignoring me entirely. Finally, the parents spoke. "You can't eat at the table," they said flatly. "There isn't enough food and we only made enough for the family." Their tone was polite in a way that made it worse, like they were correcting a child for holding a pencil incorrectly rather than denying someone a meal. Instead, they pushed a small bowl of cereal toward me, accompanied by a single spoon. No milk, no fruit, just the plain, dry cereal that you usually only eat when there's nothing else in the house. I couldn't believe it. I'd stayed over as a guest, and now I was being excluded from the central family ritual of the morning. It wasn't just that I couldn't eat the main breakfast, I was effectively being told I didn't belong at that table. The ritual had so much unspoken weight that there was no room for me, a guest, in their perfectly orchestrated breakfast scene. It got weirder. I wanted to shower after waking up and brushing my teeth, but when I asked, I was told there were no toiletries available for me. I didn't bring my own, which apparently was my mistake, and they had none to spare. They reasoned that each family member had exactly what they needed, no more, no less. The bathroom routine was completely regimented, like a military operation: showered in order, brushed teeth in order, dressed in order, breakfast in order. Any deviation from this schedule, especially by a guest, was not permitted. I sat on the edge of the couch, feeling both bewildered and humiliated, trying to figure out how to salvage this stay. I had imagined a fun sleepover, maybe watching TV, playing video games, and enjoying some snacks. Instead, I was trapped in a rigid system that had been drilled into this family for years, apparently with military precision. The morning was a silent lesson in hierarchy, family order, and the importance of adhering to tradition, even when it made no sense to anyone outside the family. As I watched, I realized the family wasn't rude or malicious. In their minds, they were upholding a long-standing tradition, one that clearly shaped how they started every day. They weren't cruel, they were just completely devoted to the ritual, and anyone outside of it, like me, was essentially invisible until they earned a place at the table. Breakfast wasn't just breakfast, it was a ceremony, a testament to their unity, punctuality, and obedience. By the time the cereal was gone, I was still in pajamas, slightly hungry, and deeply aware that I had stumbled into a world I didn't understand. I quietly ate my cereal while they chatted among themselves in low voices, then slunk out the door to wait for my parents to pick me up. I left that morning feeling a strange mixture of amusement, disbelief, and mild trauma. It wasn't just that their tradition was odd, it was that it was applied with such rigid exactness that it completely disregarded the presence of a guest. I never went back to that house for a sleepover. I still kept in touch with my friend, but I refused another overnight stay. The image of that fully set table, the perfectly groomed family, and the way they silently excluded me from their ritual is burned into my memory. It's one of those experiences that sticks with you because it's so surreal. Thinking back now, I can see why they did it. For them, this strange breakfast routine probably reinforced discipline, family cohesion, and punctuality. For me, it became a legendary example of the strange, highly specific family traditions you can encounter when visiting someone else's home. A tradition where breakfast isn't just a meal, it's a highly choreographed ceremony that leaves guests scrambling, bewildered, and hungry, both literally and figuratively. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.